would be an applicable indicator forever. In Finland, there was almost a political crisis when the child poverty rate jumped from 2% to 3%. And immediately they've done a national plan. It's a true story, and they lowered it back to 2%. So the fact that things are changing doesn't mean that this indicator, or as a society, we decided. In Israel, it went up in 25 years from 8% to 32%. And nobody cares. So it depends on the indicators. Now, the decision when to get involved is a political decision. And it goes back to what I said before about voting or political power, or again, in one of the discussions I had with Michael before, is how come people are against asking children about their own well-being? How could somebody explain why he's against it, beyond validity and reliability? You could solve those issues 16 years old. What? And my answer to Michael and my answer to him, it's a question of power. Because people say, okay, now we'll let them answer the survey, the next time they will want to decide for us. Same things were told about women a couple of years ago, about minorities. It's an issue of power. And we as an adult-driven society are much more comfortable when the power is with the adults. Now, I've answered you more or less. So the threshold will move as much as society would move. And it's also in context. So maybe in harder economic times, okay, we could allow ourselves to go down by probably the best example would be economic indicators. Say, the national debt is a very serious economic indicator. For many years, government didn't allow the economic debt to go beyond the limits. And here we came into an economic crisis, and we say, okay, in the economic crisis we could do a bigger debt. So something similar could be with children's well-being.
Dr. Asher, I think the idea of index is appealing, but you pointed out in the past, I think it's fascinating. But I wonder if you could comment on equity, because on equity, because isn't the differences within populations more important than well-being of the population overall?
Well, there's definitely differences between population, and that goes back mainly again to what I call the interpretation issue. And again, let me go back. I couldn't stress enough the fact that we don't really know. So, you know, we are building theories and concepts without really knowing enough about children's life. And we are arguing about the interpretation of something that we don't know about what it is yet. That's my feeling, at least. And there should be different interpretations. And the same indicator in different population would mean different things, even within the same society, or the same country, or city, or whatever. But I think the basic message I'm trying to convey here is that, first of all, we need to know much more about children, and then we could maybe start to decide and talk about equity. The other thing, we need to find really indicators that, or make sure that minority groups, especially minority groups, wouldn't get lost in a national index or a national indicator or a national report and so on. And minorities tend to be lost on those things.
I really appreciate that you put on the table the issue of power, because I very much agree with you. The indicators can be put to use in multiple ways. We have a situation in British Columbia. We have the highest child poverty rates in the country. We're currently cutting school lunches, but at the same time we're putting Olympic mascots in classrooms, which costs a great deal of money, and yet there is no public outcry for this. So I'm interested in thinking of the threat of the use of power and how you work with power in order to have people shift and think about things in a different way.
Well, first of all, let me admit that even though I'm involved also in an advocacy group in Israel, I wasn't so successful, at least in the last 15 years, because children's well-being in Israel is deteriorating all the time. Child poverty rates are going up and so on. So it's a struggle that we don't always win it, but it's definitely a struggle about power. And you know, it's like when you talk about child participation. I always give my students that example at Hebrew University. When they are starting to argue with me that child participation means that the parents need to give up on their power or their rights, and it's a zero-sum game. It's not a zero-sum game. And child participation in research or in decision-making doesn't mean that the child decides. The same, and then I tell the student, the same as the fact that I let you express your views doesn't mean that you decide what would be the final grade or the task or the paper instructions in the course. Somebody else is deciding. Child participation is about sharing power and about letting children participate in the process in a real way and express their view. It doesn't mean that they decide. It's true for students, true for employees, for anybody else, and it's true also for children. Now there is we could like it more or less, but it's apparent that we are living in an adult-driven society, for better or worse, usually for better, but still it's an adult-driven society, and adults are afraid to lose power for children. Now we see it here in child indicators. That's a very small portion or a very small component of the general picture. But still, it's an issue of power, and it's an issue of accepting the fact that maybe they know better than me. And you know, involving children in research, there were very few studies that went back to children and asked them what they thought about the research they were involved in. And what they found, Elisabeth Bakke-Hansen from Norway, wrote a fabulous paper on it, that children basically want 5 things if you want them to be involved in research. First of all, they want their involvement to count, to be real. They want the research to be interesting, on important things, and they don't want to waste their time. And then, you know, and we adults come and say, we decide what to study. And you are the subjectives, we are studying you. You are not partners in our study. You are not active in the study, and please participate and give us or let us observe you or whatever. That's a totally different. And the issue of power distribution is a very interesting one also in another issue of child participation in data collection. I told about future trends. Again, the methodological parts of papers and research studies around the world is full with the issue of the unequal power distribution between an interviewer and a child who is interviewed. And people are suggesting, you know, let's take younger interviewers, college students that remember how to talk. And I suggested in one paper, I've tried it once and it worked, not the best, but it was okay overall. Let's go one more step and take children as interviewers of other children. I'm not sure it's the best way, but it's at least worth exploring. If we are so worried about this power balance between the interviewer and the interviewee, and we are looking for a young-looking college student, then let's take a high school student and train him and ask him to do the interview. It will be very interesting to see.